All right, I'm back in the garage with my 2002 Porsche 911 Carrera 2. And if you've seen some of the past videos, you know that I put Ohlins Road and Track coilovers on this car. You probably might have seen some follow-up videos where I give my first impressions of the suspension change. And although I loved how much it affected the turning, turned super flat, just tremendous grip, what a change. And the steering too. The steering is just super responsive, and I loved all of that. The problem was the car was harsh on the roads. I tried playing quite a bit with all the settings: damping, coil preload, tire pressures, like just anything I could think of, and tried to go both ends of the spectrum just to feel what changes could be made. I'm convinced that I just can't get the ride quality that I'm looking for with this setup. It's now late August, so I've had months, put on about 2,500 miles on the car. So I'm faced with, what do I do? My thought was that I could go back to the OEM setup, or, just get fresh components. So new struts, use maybe the same coils, springs from the OEM setup, maybe get lowering springs. If I do this, I wasn't really happy with the stock suspension. Now that I've experienced this with the Ohlins, I want the feeling of this type of performance, or as close as I can get. I don't really want to go back to the way it was stock, although the ride was much better. So I'm trying to find a balance. I want to get more performance than stock, but I can't live with the ride quality the way it is. So my solution is to purchase some aftermarket springs for the Ohlins coilovers. I was a little reluctant to do that because I spent a lot on the Ohlins, but I think out of all of my options, it's probably the best way to preserve as much performance as possible and try to achieve the ride quality that I'm looking for. If you look on the web, I think a lot of people do feel that the car's a little harsh for the street with this setup. The people that are dual purpose, they're doing high performance driving events or autocross or track days, they have no problem living with that downside. The people that are primarily street or all street, like in my case, I think generally the suspension's a little harsh, and there's just no adjustability that's going to get rid of it. If you live in an area with good roads, probably doesn't matter, but we don't. I don't. I'm in New England, and it's just a fact of life, so I have to do something. So after talking with Ohlins about this, they gave me some spring rates as an alternative, and it turns out one of the employees that works there has a 996 Porsche and he's running these springs that they recommended. So what does that say? I'm hoping that I'm going to be happy with it, especially based on that. So what we have here are the Swift springs, and we're going to swap out the Ohlins springs for these. And the rates on these, the Ohlins front spring, which is this guy here, that OEM value is 343. The new one is 286 pound-inch. So there's a difference there, and the rear is it goes from 687 on the Ohlins coilover to 572. So what I've got to do is I've got to lift the car, pull the coilovers out, and swap out the springs, and then I'll be going through that cycle of trying to get the ride height right and blah blah blah. But it is what it is, and I've got to do it. I've got to do something to get that ride quality that I'm looking for. Okay, I'm gonna need to try to get the same ride height when I replace the spring. So I've got a stick here, and if I put the stick dead center in the wheel and I put it up against the fenders, what I've done is I've marked my points for all 4 wheels. And that way, hopefully I can just easily adjust the ride height and get close, within a couple millimeters anyway. So let's get going on this. Alright, not going to spend a lot of time on this because the other video shows how to remove the OEM struts. This should be easier because it's just the Ohlins coilover here. And what I've done first is, you see these jack stands under the wheel carriers in the front. I've raised the wheel carrier until the weight is off the car, you know, off of the support here, so we're fully compressed. And now we've taken the load off of this sway bar drop link. So with no load, we can remove that, and we'll get rid of the drop links right now. One thing I want to show you, and I'm not sure if you're going to see it, but I actually took a Sharpie and I marked where the adjustment is for height and also the adjustment for the spring preload. I'm going to use the same spec that Ohlins had for this spring. I'm assuming that's how it works, and when I drop the car, if the ride heights are weird or something doesn't seem right, I can call them, but I'm going to start out that way. Alright, we've got the coilover on the bench here. This is the Swift spring, and kind of bummed that it's not the Ohlins yellow, because you can tell Ohlins by the color. So I'm not going to be able to now. It's just going to look like a generic coilover, but it is what it is. Alright, we've got to disassemble this. And that's it. Alright, front's done. We're out in the back now. The backs are going to be a little easier because all we have to do is remove this mount bolt at the bottom and then the 3 top. Then slide the whole thing out, down, and back up and out. And the drop links had to be undone, so I compressed the suspension when I did that as well. Alright, we've got the rear coilover on the bench, and we've got to remove this damping adjustment on the top. Now one thing I want to show you real quick is these are the rears right here, and look how the new Swift spring is a little taller. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a little bit taller, which means I had marked some adjustments for the coil preload, and I'm not going to be able to use that. So I'm going to have to really play around because the height is different. So not much I can do about it. Okay, I got the rear done and hoping that I'm in the ballpark of the ride height because like I said, the coils are longer, so I just took a guess. So letting it down for the first time, and I'll take a look at the stance now. Let's do it. Looks about 3 millimeters higher. Let's see here. Yep, about the same. At least they're equal. We'll see if I want to lower it more. All right, this is the big question. What do we got here? All right, that's low. That's too low. All right, I'm in the car trying to get a sense of what the changes feel like, and I did raise the car again, and I got the ride height very close to what it was. So I did have to adjust the rears to get the height back up. All right, so I've gotten to spend a little bit of time in the car. My commute's almost an hour, and I went out for lunch, so I spent a little time in the car on the familiar roads that I'm used to. So I know how the car reacts with the Ohlins springs, and there is definitely a difference, and it's less harsh for sure. And it's really nice because even sometimes I'll forget that, you know, I made this change, you know, and I'll go over a section of road and I kind of brace myself for a little bit of a harshness, and it just kind of goes over it. Now, it's not plush, definitely not plush, and definitely more firm and more harsh than the OEM setup. My car had like 60,000 miles on it, so it was still pretty firm. You know, the suspension was in good shape, but it did have some miles, and because of the age, it was probably less firm than when it came out of the showroom. But yeah, I'm happy. I did push it in a couple sweeping turns, like there's one fast sweeping turn on the highway and a couple other areas. I have to say, the car moved around quite a bit in that sweeping turn. Definitely more than with the Ohlins stock springs. It was a little disconcerting actually, because I didn't expect it, and the car started moving, and you know these cars, you let up on the throttle and all of a sudden you start to get you feel that oversteer, you go back into the throttle and it starts to, you know, not push, but you know, straighten out. So I'm kind of like working my way through that turn going, whoa, this is taking a little bit more effort here. But I'm still experimenting and trying to get a feel. So I can definitely say that I've given up some performance just based on that one experience on that turn, but I've gained a lot of compliance in everyday driving. I think I'm going to be happy with this setup, and I'll spend a little more time, and I can give you more feedback as we go along. But I'll get a little techie here, and you know, if you're done, you're done. Glad you viewed the video. But if you know, just thinking about this suspension, and my reference is from off-road motorcycles. Like, I've spent a lot of time on off-road bikes since I was a kid, and have set up a lot of suspensions and really kind of understand that suspension. That's kind of where my experience comes from, and it's different from automobiles for sure, but kind of the principles are the same. And when I think about what's going on with this suspension, I think that, you know, with off-road bikes, you have high speed and low speed adjustability, and that's not the velocity of the motorcycle, it's the velocity or the speed of the shock travel or the stroke travel in the suspension. And a lot of times you'll have adjustability for both, and with these Ohlins, obviously you don't even have rebound adjustment, so you're kind of locked into one damping rate, and it is what it is. And I kind of find like these Ohlins coilovers have really good slow speed damping, that like they've got it down, you know. So really, like, dips in the road, and for instance that sweeper, that really would have been spot on with a firmer spring, and it was, you know, it was with the OEM, with the Ohlins stock setup. But now that it's undersprung, the damping, you know, can't really deal with a high-speed sweeper like that, because, you know, the movement of the suspension is relatively slow. It's the high-speed stuff that the Ohlins, I think, has more of a problem with, and that high-speed stuff is like hard edge bumps, irregularities in the road, broken pavement, potholes, things like that. That's where that stroke in the compression stroke really is at a fast rate. And so that damping, I think, kind of just hits a wall, and it gives you a little bit of a jolt, like a little harshness. And even now with these springs, I still feel that. But overall, it's much better, and it's going to be livable. And I'll go back to the turn-in, and the grip is still really good, you know. So I picked up that at the expense of maybe some, you know, higher speeds, body control type of thing. But yeah, that's my impression. I think the Ohlins, it's a good product. It's got that low speed compression down, it like dips and rises in the road, and if you're on a track, most of that stuff is slow speed, relatively slow speed for compression stroke, because it's not, you're not hitting sharp edge type of things that really go through the stroke quick. You know, it's just compliant with that slower speed stroke, and it's the high speed stroke hitting those bumps that kind of gives us a little trouble. All right, so I wanted to make this video to give people as much info as possible, people that are considering the Ohlins Road and Track coilovers. And you kind of saw what I went through and what it took for me to be happy in the end. Now, you got to keep in mind that I'm a street-only driver, okay? I'm not trying to set a car up for a track, and my roads, local roads, are not good. Okay, so that drove me to what, you know, my decisions were to get to where I'm at. So your mileage will vary depending on your intentions and where you live and the quality of the roads. But I just don't want people to think that if they buy the Ohlins Road and Track, they're going to be happy out of the box. Everybody will be happy, because that kind of was my impression. If you look online, you see the reviews. Everybody had great things to say. I convinced myself that anything could be adjusted out or in, so I could achieve what I wanted to just through the adjustability of the setup, and that wasn't true. So I'm at a point now where I'm happy. There is a little compromise on the performance, but it's a street car, and the livability is more important to me. And in the end, you know, I love this car. It's the benefits of this car are just tremendous to me. You know, you can't buy a car in this at this weight with this performance and the visceral feeling of a car of this generation and the inputs of, you know, everything you feel when you drive it. It's just such a special car. And you know, I haven't brought it up, but I have another car, performance car, that if I just wanted to do track days or just all out performance, that's a car that I would choose to take. And I'll introduce it to the channel at some point, but this Porsche is just a great special car to me, and I love it. So anyway, hopefully this helps as you guys work through your decisions on what you want to do with your suspension. Thanks.